Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. This is Valentine's week. I hope that many of you will be celebrating with friends and loved ones for this week. And as always, want everyone that joins to be sure and let us know where you're joining from, what country, city, whatever. And also, please feel free to share comments, questions along the way. And today we're going to be talking about being alone without being lonely and what the implications of that are. And I, as always, want to start the show off by discussing what we on Wisdom Seeker Live podcast believe wisdom is. And that is it's a journey, it's not an event. And the journey starts with gaining knowledge, and we do that formally, informally, however. And we then take that knowledge. And by the way, knowledge is not our power as much as we have been told over the years that it might be. Actually, knowledge is just the beginning, and by itself doesn't do us a lot of good. But the second step in this process is for us to gain understanding. And understanding is where we take our knowledge that we have picked up and begin to apply it and do things with it, solve problems, answer questions, help relationships, work, whatever. But it's where we begin to apply it and gain experience in our lives by using the knowledge to be beneficial for us, and hopefully not just for us, but others as well. And the third step and most critical step, though, is to move into wisdom. And wisdom is seeing things from a bigger perspective outside of ourselves, and much bigger perspective, to a point where we're seeing that the way we use our knowledge and understanding impacts others, and that our choices with that knowledge and understanding influences, impacts, affects others, not just ourselves, but it does affect us both inwardly and outwardly. So wisdom is that much, much larger perspective, and it is less self-focused, but bigger picture focused. And for those of us that have a spiritual bent, the way we kind of describe it is trying to see the world through God's eyes. So that's about wisdom and the way we see it on Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. And I want to welcome a number of folks this morning: Jeremy and Eunice and Rick and Lydia. Always good to see you all. Glad to have you with us. Look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments about this. And this episode and topic is inspired by some posts that I had seen about being able to be alone without being lonely. And it's an interesting topic, and it's got lots of challenges, because some of us tend to have extrovert temperament, and therefore being alone is kind of a natural place for us. And the challenge is that even if we're introverts and we're alone, it is not uncommon for us to still feel lonely. And then if you're an extrovert and you feel lonely when you're alone, then there are implications of that. It's a symptom of something in my mind. And that symptom is that we have not gotten to know ourselves. We have not come to terms with who we are, to a point of accepting ourselves and loving ourselves as we've been created. And I think that creates a challenge for us. And it doesn't mean, by the way, that if you're an extrovert and like to be around people a lot, that there's something wrong when you are not taking time to be alone, or you're not alone all the time. And introverts, it doesn't mean that you're always needing to stay alone. It is about being in the right place mentally, emotionally, and most importantly, to be in a place where we have learned to accept who we are and be comfortable with who we've been created. We need to be able to be who we are and be okay. If we're not, if we're uncomfortable being alone and we're always in that state, then we're looking for distractions, looking for other people. There may be something there that we need to potentially address. See, Eunice has a comment. I always like to hear your comments. Prolonged loneliness can drain you emotionally. This makes life seem bleak and pointless. However, you can be alone without being lonely. Solitude creates opportunities for self-discovery, creative thought, and self-reflection. Very well put, Eunice. And I like the word solitude because that's different than being lonely. Solitude indeed is a good opportunity to for us to become self-aware, to do internal exploration, to do self-evaluation. That's all a healthy part of our lives. In fact, most of us are lacking in that area. We are primarily functioning on autopilot so that we are not aware of ourselves. We're not aware of what's going on around us, to a point that I don't know about any of you, but I've had moments where I will go through the motions of my day and then try to remember the details and exactly what happened, and even had moments, and I think this is true of all of us, where we are so comfortable and accustomed to driving that we will drive a distance and really not have done anything but, obviously watch people in front of us and try to be mindful of conditions and all, stay safe. But in terms of really observing, really picking up on what's going on, well, we have a challenge there. So I just want us to consider that there are times where we need solitude or being alone, but it shouldn't be to a point of being lonely with ourselves, because we all need that at times. Just like, and especially extroverts need that, because too often we are trying to run from ourselves, if you will, by staying busy and occupied. And by the way, introverts, those of us that tend to be okay being alone, need to make it a point to balance out our life situation by being around people, just like Eunice said, because to not get around people has potentially detrimental emotional and mental challenges. Let's see, Jeremy makes a comment that sometimes being alone provides us with an opportunity to reflect and think what we can do better and how we can achieve the life we were meant to live. Indeed, such a valuable part of it. And so we should actually be to a point in our life that we seek out some of that alone time or solitude on a periodic basis. And in some ways, that alone time for those of us that are of a spiritual nature is we are physically alone here, but it's time that we take to focus in on our Creator and to learn what we can and gain insight from our Creator in this process. Lydia makes a comment. Solitude is a time of inner healing and spiritually embracing the inner voice, intuitively sound with greater clarity. And yes, again, the solitude, the time alone is very good because it's when we can get quiet and not have other people's voices around or too much noises, that we began to learn how to hear that inner voice, the voice of our Creator, trying to help us avoid trouble if possible, or learn from challenges and trouble that come our way. But by being able to hear that voice, that quiet voice, it's valuable. But what happens, and this is something I have seen and experienced, is that when we get alone, we get anxious, we get uncomfortable, and we want to immediately try to fill that void with other things or other people. And that's uncomfortable, and that is not healthy. And now, bear in mind, again, I'm not talking about living a life of solitude. There are some that are called to that, but most of us need that interaction with others because it helps us in our person. And in fact, I am at a point where I'm observing some things in family that are interesting, and that is a challenge with mental acuity and mental processes that have been negatively affected by too much solitude or isolation or aloneness. In this situation, that has up until recently not been a problem about being lonely. That was a desired state. But what has occurred is that by not being exposed to people on a regular basis, our memory, our mind, and our mental capacities began to get challenged, because the very act of being with others gives us stimulation, causes us to practice out, if you will, with using our memory and our minds on a healthy basis. So again, when I'm talking about being alone, doesn't mean I'm talking about becoming isolated from others. But many of us don't have that problem. We stay around people all the time through our work, through our daily lives, and so on. And again, being around is good, but most of us aren't comfortable being alone with ourselves and getting quiet. If you want to get some people real uncomfortable, stop the noise. As a speaker, sometimes, in order to make an impact or make a point, I will even purposely stop speaking and get very quiet for a period of time. And what's really interesting is to watch people's responses, and because within a 30 seconds or so, people begin to get very uncomfortable, shift around in their seats. You can tell that they're just not comfortable being alone and being quiet. We have so much noise around us now that it's a challenge between technology and electronic devices and everything. Is not generally a problem of having too much quiet around us. It's quite the opposite. And so we need to begin to be able to have times of solitude, of being alone and being comfortable with it. Jeremy has a comment. Sometimes being alone for an extended period tends to lead to depression. Balance is the key when applying. Indeed, as always, balance is important, and it's something that we should always strive to. And in this case, we're talking about one aspect of the balance there. And for many of us, the balance falls in getting a better grasp on one of the extremes, that we don't historically have. And that is the part of being alone. And part of the value of this and getting comfortable with who we are, who we're created to be, is it helps to lay the foundation for us to be able to be comfortable with others. And I'm not just talking about getting along or getting by, talking about to a point that when we are comfortable with ourselves, we are accepting of who we are and who we're created to be with our design and purpose, we are then able to accept others. It gives us a foundation to be able to accept others where they are, who they are, what they are, and even be able to support them in their life without having a sense that, well, we need them to be like us in order to be able to feel validated. And that's not what we need to be. And so, again, learning to be alone, learning to have solitude. One of the great ways to be alone is if we choose to go and spend time in nature, in creation, because during that time, it's a way to reflect on the beauty and amazing design of creation and gain additional insight into our Creator as part of it. And some people will use the alone time for meditation, for prayer, and reading, learning, and so on. But I would say most people lack the presence of solitude and alone time in their lives. And I think quite often, deep down, it's not just because we're busy, but because when we get in that solitude and that alone time, we're just not comfortable with who we are. We're not sure that we even like who we are. And that if that's the case, if you cannot be alone, have solitude without a sense of loneliness, an uncomfortable sense by being alone, then you may want to consider that there is an issue there. There's a core issue to address that can help you with where you need to be. And other symptoms, by the way, that we are uncomfortable with ourselves is when we're willing to even get into situations and relationships that are unhealthy for us, just for the sake of having someone around to not be lonely. And if we're always striving to be with someone, around someone, and we can't be alone, it may be that we've got some issues, concerns that we need to address. And that's either through talking with friends or family or a mentor. And in some cases, if we're not aware or don't catch it in time, it may degrade down into depression or other negative mental emotional state. And in those cases, you may need to seek out some professional type help. And just for the record, I have to be honest. Some people say, well, I don't need that. That is, I'm stronger than that, this, that, or the other. I will tell you, over the years, I have sought out professional help many times. I have sought out non-professional help, mentors and guidance and things like that. So I hope that none of you will let that become a stigma to getting to a point where you can grow and become comfortable being alone or during solitude because you're not uncomfortable with who you are or what you are and the emotions and the mental processes associated with that. it's really interesting that in extreme cases that people that when they get alone, when there is solitude, it's almost torturous for them. And if that's the case, what I really encourage you to do is to seek out some help in one form or another. And again, nothing wrong with, if needed, to be able to reach out and get professional help, because part of the core of this will cause people to lose hope. And that's if we're uncomfortable being alone with ourselves, there's in extreme cases that leads us to hopelessness and can even lead to suicidal thoughts and so on. And if you're dealing with any of that, reach out, please reach out to someone. And something I've always said here on LinkedIn: if you're ever needing someone, you're feeling alone and lonely to a point of you're getting desperate or unhealthy thoughts, reach out. I know many people here on LinkedIn that are willing to be there and respond to people in those times. So back to, the topic, being alone without being lonely. That's healthy. Being able to have solitude without it causing us a lot of discomfort. Now, just again, remind you that it is healthy when you get alone sometimes to have some discomfort, because there's some things that solitude time is there for, so that you can address some things that are going on. And it doesn't mean that, something bad, wrong, or anything like that. It just means that there are some issues that during the solitude that you can explore and gain some insight and understanding into yourself, and begin to explore what is wrong and how can I do something to address that something. And so again, let's get to a point where we are comfortable being alone without getting lonely. And as Jeremy pointed out, though, let's keep balance. We don't want to isolate and become disconnected from other people, because that's just as unhealthy as not being able to be in solitude. Welcome. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna do my best with your name, Shaiju. Yeah, if I mispronounce it, please let me know. I apologize if I do. But welcome, glad to have you with us. And we're talking about being able to be alone without being lonely. Love to hear your accounts of times of being alone, either comfortably or uncomfortably as part of the process. I know for me, one of the ways that I will gain time of solitude will be to go out and walk in the woods, walk in nature, go to the mountains, or just recently walking the beach and by the ocean, and just being quiet and being alone. Doesn't mean that there wasn't people around, but I was there, being able to have insightful consideration and exposure to, the ocean is such an amazing part of creation, and it makes us feel, helps us get the right perspective on life sometimes when we do that. So find ways to have solitude that help us be there. But if each time you try to have solitude, you try to get alone, you get very uncomfortable, you get anxious, you get nervous, then it may be that you need to deal with your relationship with yourself. And the key to that, the key about that being healthy in that area, is that when we can be alone and comfortable with ourselves, that helps us when we are with other people to be comfortable being around them. And that's where it gets into value as relationally, and that being able to be comfortable with ourselves helps us to be comfortable with others. It's all part of the way we're made up and the way we're designed. And so, again, being alone, and if you're, every time you're alone, you're lonely, then it points to a symptom of a deeper challenge, a deeper root issue. And one of the best ways to help kind of keep that in proper perspective is plan solitude time on a regular basis. And I will remind people that one of the challenges that this podcast has given and has been theirs from day one is the what we call the 40-day challenge. And the 40-day challenge is about, in part, learning to be alone and have solitude. And it's the challenge is that we are to disconnect from the noise around us. That could be disconnecting for a time from people, from things, and and it takes on different forms. But we need a time to disconnect, and during that time of disconnecting, the goal is that we begin to observe what's going on. We observe inwardly, we observe outwardly, and begin to see our life from that bigger perspective, and begin to consider that when I am going somewhere, I am not just going from point A to point B, but I am interacting and affecting people that are around me. So we disconnect. So we begin a choice of solitude from things or people. And then we observe. We're looking inside. We're looking outside to see what we find. And then the last and key step in this challenge is that once we start observing, what wisdom can we take away? What is the thing that we can learn and get perspective on, that bigger perspective, such as do we have behaviors that we are not normally aware of because they're just part of what we do as we go along, that could be creating a problem. Behaviors and mental, emotional behaviors, physical behaviors that could be harming us and harming others as well. So that 40-day challenge is about being able to be alone without being lonely. Welcome, Rukia. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not, please feel free to correct me, because I like to honor other people and their names as they are part of the show. So again, what are some of your stories about times of solitude, times of being alone, and whether you were able to do so and have one experience, or was it time of very great discomfort and it was hard to spend that time? Or in some cases, we end up in solitude because of life circumstances. And those can be some of the hardest ones. Welcome, Karen. Glad to have you. In fact, we are here in the U.S., and I think there are other parts of the world that celebrate Valentine's Day. This is a really interesting time, because this time of year, there are people that can be very much with other people, around other people, lots of things going on, and still feel very lonely. And if that's you, then again, maybe it's time to reach out to people, reach out to mentors, or reach out to coaches, reach out to family, or in some cases, maybe seek out some professional help. Because at the end of the day, one of the things that we are designed to do is to be able to be alone and to do so without being lonely, to be alone without being exceptionally uncomfortable. And when we can't do that, then it points to a potential issue in our life that we may need to deal with, because we all need that solitude and to be able to have good outcomes from that solitude. Jeremy has a comment. It's important to remember when you're alone, you're not always alone, even if you're isolated. Indeed, I find it interesting that people on social media can be feel very isolated and alone, even though you have window to thousands and even millions of people. And when that's the case, if you're struggling with that sense, even when you're around people, again, there may be something there that you need to work on. There may be a root cause there that is causing you this discomfort and causing you not to be able to be alone without being lonely. And being lonely is a very compelling sense. And the reason that we have the sense of loneliness is because in the big scheme of things, we are not designed to be isolated all the time. We are designed to be a part of society, culture, or to use an old biblical term, we're part of a body of humanity that we are designed to interact with. And that is part of what we need and all, but not to a point that we lose who we are. So again, if you're not able to be alone without becoming very lonely feeling, uncomfortable with what's happening with being alone, then we may need to work on some things. And usually the basis for that is that we're not comfortable with our own company, if you will. Recently, I came up with a quote that I included in this post, and that is, if we are not comfortable being alone, maybe we need to take time to get to know ourselves. And I hope that part of the outcome of this episode of Wisdom Seeker Live is to begin to encourage us all to become comfortable with who we are. Welcome, Zaid. Glad to have you. Or Z. I'm still adjusting Z. And Z's one of our regulars. And so anyway, one of the things we can do during solitude, and this is something I think that so many are lacking, is to explore our value as a person. And the more we recognize that we have value, regardless of what we do, how we act, what people say, what the circumstances indicate, we have great value when we're created. It is not something that we have to prove. And if we're not to a point where we have found that value for ourselves and begin to accept it, that may be a great place to go while you're being alone, while you're in solitude. Interesting to hear, Zaid. Glad to know that the YouTube channel is working. It's been there for a while, and I've not gotten a lot of feedback through it, so I assume it must work okay. Welcome, Lee. Glad to have you with us. And the topic we're talking about is being alone, having solitude in our lives without being lonely, to a point that we avoid being alone, that we avoid solitude in our lives, because that solitude, that time, is such value. It's such a great time of introspection. It's a part of what we talked about the first episode of this podcast, of the 40-day challenge, and disconnecting from the noise around us, whatever that looks like, to take time to observe and seek out wisdom in regards to our life. It really helps us gain great perspective and begin to live our lives rather than go through the motions of living our life. So one of the things that I would suggest, that when we have solitude, if we have purpose in it, it's not just because it happened to us or whatever. Having purpose, even in our solitude or our alone time, can also help us to not feel lonely. So I really hope that we will explore this and get to know who we have been created to be, and understand the principles of how we've been created, including and especially related to our value as a human being. Because when we can ever get to that point, we begin to really get to a place where we're healthier for us and for others. Let's see. Lydia has a comment. Purposely seek solitude moments to spend time listening, enjoying the moment in the presence of God. Just longing and being still before the presence of a peaceful moment refresh our inner faith and strength. Indeed. And in today's crazy world that we're in, those are more valuable as each passing day goes, because that solitude, that time of peaceful moment, if you will, is such a time of refreshment. And my concern is, if when we get alone, when we have solitude, if it's not a peaceful moment, then we need to get to the root of why it's not a peaceful moment. So thank you for that, Lydia. Good perspective. Karen says, living alone doesn't necessarily mean you are alone. There are good neighbors around. You can reach out to friends and families even far away. There are tools available to connect via Zoom, phone. Indeed. And one of the things I would encourage each of us as wisdom seekers to do is to seek that out and use the tools that we have available, not just for ourselves, by the way, but for others. And this may be a good moment to mention that if you have a time where someone comes to mind, you can't stop thinking about them, or you feel an impression on your heart about them, that is probably a good time to reach out and use the various tools we have available to do that. Reach out and tell them, hey, I was thinking about you, or you came to my mind, or whatever, and reach out and share that with them. That may be a moment that you're going to be able to help them in their moment of loneliness or isolation. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Karen, because that's a valuable place for us to go as we move forward. And the value of being, having solitude, having alone time, is we begin to be able to hear that voice or feel that impression in our lives about others. I can't tell you the number of times that I have felt that and reached out to someone, and without any knowledge of their circumstances or what was going on or indication of any issue, come to find out that in reaching out, it was a time that really helped them. It encouraged them, because at that point they were feeling that sense of loneliness and that isolation and disconnection. And so, good point to use those tools to reach out and connect. But part of the way to get where we're able to do that well is to be able to be comfortable enough to be able to hear that intuitive, quiet voice. Forget which one of you mentioned being able to hear that inner voice. Such an important part of who we are as a human, as part of the human race. And so being alone, it's okay. As long as you can be alone and not be overwhelmed with a sense of loneliness. If you are alone and you are overwhelmed with a sense of loneliness, consider that part of what's going on is that you are not comfortable with who you have been created to be, who you are. And therefore, being alone or in solitude, we become aware of those things and it makes us uncomfortable. So it might be that that time is a good opportunity to begin to deal with those questions and issues. And one of the quotes that I have that I like to share is that we do not earn our value. So as a result of not earning our value, we can't lose it or we can't affect it because we don't earn it. Others don't give us value. So doesn't matter what they say or think, it doesn't change the value of who we are. Our value comes from our Creator, who has given every one of us great value, intrinsic and by the very fact that we are. And our Creator is not going to take that value away. And so when we can get comfortable knowing that value, accepting that value, and living that value, that's one of the things that's going to help us not be lonely at times when we are alone or isolated or in solitude. Get and find that value. Let that drive everything in your life. If you're not there and you have not sure how to find and understand that value, reach out to other people, reach out to family, friends, mentors, or even reach out to professionals. I know that one of the things that I do as a coach is help people begin to identify and tie in and let their value drive what happens in their life. Let that value drive inwardly how we respond. And so if you are not sure and understanding of that value to a point that you no longer feel driven to have to be able to prove yourself to people or do that next something to make you feel like you're valuable, or that next promotion or that next raise, those are not where your value is found. And if that's what you're after, it may be time to have some alone time to find out and seek out and learn about those things, and in particular, learn about your value as a person. Lydia offers a comment. Sometimes during solitude, God revealed someone else who needs prayer or going through hard times or is in need of encouragement. Yes, and that is such an important and valuable part of solitude and being alone, is it gives us a chance to be able to not only have time to consider ourselves, but to truly consider others and hear that still small voice that prompts us that someone is in need, someone is hurting, and that we can reach out and help. So that is so true, Lydia. Learning to be alone and learning to do so without being lonely, such a key part of a healthy life. Jeremy offers a a comment. My best advice for those who want isolation but not alone is to take a day or few by going camping, or take the time to get back to the roots of humanity by being around nature. This can be done alone or with others. During that time, if with others, you can take a little time for yourself and yet be surrounded by those who are with you to support you, while they too have the opportunity to seek wisdom through being isolated. That's good advice, Jeremy. The key is choosing to do so, being intentional. That is so important. And learning to be in solitude, choosing to be in solitude, is something we need to do. And the busier our world gets, which it is continuing to get really crazy, that solitude is even more important and valuable to us to remain healthy. So, good advice. Uh, get out and out in creation. Again, when I reference it, it's usually get out away from a lot of human development, in terms of buildings and stuff. Get out in the woods, get out by the ocean, get out near a river, a lake. And camping is a great way to do that. And even if you're not comfortable camping, I know for some of you, the idea of best idea of roughing it is to not go to a 5-star, but maybe a 2-star hotel. I get that. But most anyone can take time to get out and away from a lot of man-made things and get out in places where it's just about creation. Getting out around the ocean is such a great piece. Go out there, and especially when it's not during peak tourist season, get out and walk around and just sit and observe. One of the things that I know I like to do when I get out camping or out in the woods is to have a campfire, and just sit around the campfire and look into the fire itself and just think and consider. And there is I don't know, a calming or grounding effect that comes from that. Because, like Jeremy talks about, we're kind of getting back to our roots as a human by getting away from some of the things that pull at us and distract us and get our attention. But in order to do that, we have to become okay with being alone. We have to have a level of comfort with solitude in order to be there. And I know there are people that within minutes even of being alone or being in a place of solitude get very uncomfortable, have negative emotions and have negative responses. And if that's you, consider that the first step is to begin to understand who you are and understand what you have as a human being, and to especially get an understanding, really find out about your value as a human, and hopefully come to terms with the fact that you have value as a human being by yourself without any addition, and when any kind of theoretical subtraction doesn't take away from that value. So that if we're learn to be comfortable with solitude, it helps us to be able to get grounded, have times of being able to do introspection, also to observe what's going on around us. These are all important parts of being healthy as a human. Lydia offers comment. Solitude moment is also a time of discipline, being still, learning to explore within our inner soul in a deeper understanding of ourselves intangibly. Yes, sometimes those moments of solitude are a time of really dealing with our inner person. You know, if we're staying busy outwardly, physically all the time, it distracts us from being able to look at our inner person. And by the way, something that at different times on Wisdom Seeker Live, as well as the podcast I do with my business partner, Anton, talk about holistic look at health. And that includes a healthy inner person. Uh, and from my standpoint, I am find that that inner person is more important than in many ways the outer person, because the inner person is going to endure beyond time. The body is going to quit. We all leave this planet, this life, the same way, and that's when our body quits and gives up. But our inner person, our soul, our spirit continue on. And part of the value of this solitude is to nurture our inner person, the core of who we really are. And the healthier we are there, by the way, the healthier we're likely going to be in our body, because they're all connected. And, you know, Anton likes to talk about this all the time, how that the body and our soul and our spirit all interact and are interconnected, and that you can't isolate one from the other. If you try to do that, you're actually putting yourself in an unhealthy situation by splitting up. We're all a total human being, and the easy way I like to put it is we're three parts. We have a body, we have a soul, and we have a spirit. And we can't disconnect those. When we try to do that, it's when we get unhealthy and we have issues. Let's see. Z makes a comment. As an only child, being alone wasn't an option for me. It was a fact of life growing up. Certainly, I can appreciate that. But even only children can become, even in their aloneness, even though it's something they were accustomed to, can still be very uncomfortable in that loneliness and that alone time, that solitude. And again, for me, it's real interesting to, as a teacher, a trainer, a speaker, to kind of put a time of solitude by getting very quiet in a setting where there's normally noise. And the level of discomfort that I observe in those groups at that moment is really, really remarkable, almost tangible, almost where you could touch it, because it is such a powerful thing. But we need to get to a point where we're comfortable being alone with ourselves, being alone with who we are and who we've been created to be. And it's, by the way, it's also a good time to reevaluate and look at our why, our purpose, and to ask questions about where we are in our life. Are we at that point? Are we on the track to fulfill our purpose and to pursue our vision as an individual? So hopefully we can get comfortable and be alone, isolated at times, not all the time, but alone, isolated, or and do so without getting anxious, without becoming fearful, without becoming nervous, without negative emotional responses. And so if you can get alone with yourself and be good with that, God bless, and make the most of it. If you're someone, which I think there are a lot of people that are completely uncomfortable being alone with themselves, then consider exploring what can you do? How can you become more comfortable being alone. And you can seek that out in reading materials. One place that I always recommend, I think there's so much wisdom there, and that's in the Bible. Seek out other people, friends, family, mentor, coach. And if you have extreme reactions to being alone and discomfort with that, then it may be time to consider reaching out to some professional help, a counselor, a psychologist, psychiatrist, whomever, because life is going to cause us to be isolated or in solitude at times. And we need to be able to be comfortable with that so that we don't become anxious and fearful and even feelings of desperation and hopelessness. That's all part of being able to be alone without being lonely. That way, when we have those moments of isolation, struggles, whatever, we can remain healthy in our approach to it. So, learn to be alone without being lonely. Be able to have moments of solitude or isolation and it not be unhealthy, but rather be healthy for us. Encourage that having those times on a regular basis. I would even suggest that a daily basis is probably ideal, but each of you need to find that out for yourselves. And if you're ever in that situation, start looking at your value as a person, not based on your circumstances, your condition, your status, but based on the fact that you've been created for a purpose by a loving, wise creator, and that maybe that's the time to refresh and remind yourself of the value that you have as a human being. So thanks, everyone. So good to see all of you. I hope that you'll have a blessed week. I hope that you will begin to find times of solitude and do so without having a sense of being lonely, that you're comfortable with who you are and who you've been created to be, and recognize your value, therefore having a level of comfort just by being with you. So thanks. Have an amazing week. We'll see you next Monday on Wisdom Seeker Live podcast at 8 a.m. Eastern, and we will take on a new topic. As always, if you have a suggestion for a topic, please share it in the comments or DM me on LinkedIn, whatever. We're always open to that, because at the end of the day, we want to find wisdom that is helpful to everyone. Thank you. Take care. See you next week. Bye now.